Hey everyone, welcome back to RTS Masterminds. We have been on a bit of a break here with Brandon. Both of us have been extremely busy. Do you want to give our
Yeah, that's kind of
excuses
my
real quick?
that's kind of my fault. I feel like we were on a bit of a crunch with Tempest Rising to get out first our playable preview, and then for Steam Strategy Fest the demo for Tempest Rising, which is actually out like perpetually from now on. It shows off kind of the opening cinematic, the main menu. I'm doing a whole ad for my game now. um,
You
but
should.
yeah, we were just going nuts trying to get that thing out the door, and I just didn't have any spare cycles, unfortunately. So we can all blame me for the delay in the next episode.
Ah, no, though. There were some dates that we arranged that I just skipped out on as well, so no crunch for us, but we did reveal Titan Quest 2, so there's my ad. You can wishlist it now on Steam. That's right,
Oh, it was
Titan
like
Quest.
as soon as it was announced, I was like, it's probably the biggest one of the biggest announcements in the whole THQ like summer event thing
Yeah, it is the
was Titan
most
Quest.
wishlisted thus far, so pretty proud of that. And
Nice, nice.
I'm hoping that eventually we'll show the gameplay and people will be equally happy to see that as they were the cinematic announcement. So patience,
Nice.
patience.
Yeah, I'm obsessively checking our wish list rank. We actually the preview did really well for us. We went from 87th most wish listed on Steam to we are currently as of yesterday at 63rd. Um,
Awesome.
and we're one of the most wish listed strategy games. There's a couple of them that are ahead of Tempest Rising, like Homeworld 3, obviously. Men of War 2 actually is way up there as well. Um, but yeah, I've been blown away by the reception that we've gotten so far, and I'm gonna stop talking about Tempest. It's hard to not talk about it, but
We'll have to make a
uh,
dedicated episode though. But today we wanted to talk a little bit about Warhammer Age of Sigmar Realms of Ruin, the longest RTS strategy title
I know it
in
just
its name.
rolls off the tongue. There's just more name keeps coming as you go. Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, Realms of Ruin. Keeps going. Wait till they start adding DLCs and
Oh
expansions, and
god.
you've got Realms of Ruin, Realms of Chaos, or whatever the first expansion's going to be.
Sigmar, bless this ravaged name. Anyways, we want to talk a little bit about basically how we perceived the beta, and now that launch is coming soon, they've just announced the
I think
undead
it's no,
faction, right? So that's looking
and
pretty
I
good.
think they're launching on November 17th, if I remember
Mm-hmm.
correctly. It's early to mid November anyway. You know what? I've got their site up. Let me just double check so we get that right. But yeah, nothing if not timely. That's us, right? This was a couple months ago, and at this point that they did um their beta, and we are just now getting to talk about it.
Yes, indeed. I actually played quite a bit of it. I live streamed it for like, what was it, 5 hours or so? Yeah, it was pretty fun. I played outside of the live stream a little bit as well. Um, Quite a bit of games I got to do in that time, and overall it was a good experience. Although I wasn't entirely positive about it, we'll get around to that momentarily. But what are your overall impressions on the game?
Okay, so I'm gonna do my big caveat spiel.
Yeah,
Um, my favorite Warhammer game is Dawn of War 2. And from the outset, Realms of Ruin has reminded me in a good way of Dawn of War 2. Um, I wrote an article after the beta. Maybe we can link to it in the show notes,
absolutely.
where I definitely gave the game some tough love. Um, I think it has promise, but I think it needs to have some polishing done to live up to the promise of the game. Um, it's they're doing it. I wouldn't necessarily say console first, but it's definitely a big part of their plan is to make this a console friendly game. Um, and I think that does affect some pretty big sections of the user experience. But overall, yeah, I mean, like as soon as the pre-orders went up, I pre-ordered the game. I'm really excited. The Night Haunt actually was the faction I was hoping to get because they've got the four main um like categories of armies in Age of Sigmar. And for order, they have the what are they called? The Stormcast Eternals. And then for the destruction, they have the orc. I
Oruk
cannot
or Rook.
the
Yeah,
yes, the
Cruel
Orc.
Boys. Yeah.
Orc Cruel Boys. And then for the undead, I went and I'm not very familiar with Age of Sigmar. I'm more of a Warhammer 40k guy. Um, but I looked into the different undead factions, and I was like, the Night Haunt would be really cool, and I was very excited to see that they went with the Night Haunt for their undead faction. And then we still have yet to see what they do for Chaos. But yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty big launch. Four factions. Um, they've got the campaign. I think it's going to be a pretty big launch for RTS when it comes out.
Yeah, for sure. And they're on all the platforms. They got multiplayer, obviously, and with the cross-platform play as well. So you can even
Oh,
play ranked keyboard and mouse versus controller. That's a thing.
that's like going back to 2009, like, or earlier, 07 with like Halo Wars and Universe at War. I remember playing Universe at War, swapping back and forth between PC and Xbox.
Yeah, we,
Yeah.
we also did that in Halo Wars 2, that you were able to play keyboard and mouse versus controller. And to this day, it's like fairly even between the two input methods.
I think for Universe at War, some of the top like 10 players were console players.
Hmm.
In fact, the game is still active because it runs on Microsoft's servers, so you can actually go see people on the leaderboard still, and people can that still own the game can go do ranked. Um, but there are people that are at the top of the leaderboards in Universe at War from like 2010 or something, because they never reset them and they're still active.
But yeah, everybody has high expectations of Realms of Ruin, and we haven't seen all that much from the campaign. I'm assuming they don't want to spoil anything, which is fair enough. And based on how the game is working, I believe that is going to be their big ticket item, really, with their fantastic in-game cinematics. They really made sure that the presentation of the game is prioritized over many other things, really. So everything's a very cinematic experience. The units are extremely detailed for an RTS. Do you agree with what I just said? Do you think that's the case?
Um, yeah, so in their trailer, when they released the Night Haunt, they showed some snippets of what looks like a world map sort of thing, with maybe some branching choices in how you progress through the missions. It'll be interesting to see a little bit more. Hopefully, they'll do a campaign trailer or something, or some sort of other announcement about more specifics about the campaign. But yeah, I think campaign is going to be a big push for them. Um, they also have, it looks like they're doing like hero skins,
Yes.
early access unlocks, um, profile customization. So some of that stuff feels more oriented towards multiplayer to me.
Hmm.
Um, like profile banners and skins, that seems more multiplayer related. I wonder if they're going to have, do you know, I actually don't know off the top of my head, if they've announced any sort of like co-op or like casual friendly, as opposed to it all being
Ooh, good question.
ranked.
I'm actually not sure. We're gonna
Let
have to
me look.
check the Steam page super quickly.
I'm actually on their website. Um, okay, but while one of us does research, the other one can talk more about the game. Um, so absolutely, you are correct. It's a very pretty RTS. It shows very well. Um, the fact that they have opted to not go for base building, as always, is controversial. Um, and I don't know if it's more of a let's make this friendlier for console thing, or if they're intentionally kind of trying to evoke Dawn of War 2. Um, or and this is one thing I think Relic did with Dawn of War 2 is they're trying to evoke more cleanly the tabletop experience. Um, I am a very small part of a couple of Age of Sigmar communities, and um, where my article, like I said, was kind of giving the game some tough love, the actual Sigmar like Reddit community was really, really positive about the game for the most part. Um, so it could be that, this might not be the game for some like core RTS players, but they might capture some like Sigmar people that don't really um that might be intimidated by a more traditional RTS. So I guess we'll have to see what happens with launch and afterwards, but it could be that that's an intentional thing to try to capture people that like Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but aren't necessarily going to be like seeking out RTS to play. Um, I don't know. That's just something that occasionally has kind of uh, tickled my brain, like wondering if they have like some sort of strategy that they're going for with that.
Yeah, just being extremely representative of what the Age of Sigmar IP stands for, and capturing that core audience of Age of Sigmar fans is certainly a smart move when you go for the licensed product. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's their core focus.
This is actually cool. I did not know this. I'm on their website. In their features, they are launching with a map editor, army painter, obviously,
Yes.
good touch, but map editor and a scene editor where you can like pre-create dioramas of like combat scenarios, place and pose characters and props
Oh,
in
wow.
creatively curated and shareable scenes to share with the community. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and as for co-op, it's not actually a co-op mode, but it's like a one person single player challenge mode that they're doing where you have these progressively more difficult levels, and they're procedurally generated. So that's what they have instead of a co-op experience. So much more single player focused and not reliant on multiplayer.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. That's I mean that's similar to kind of the draw for something like Total War, where you have these massive single player experiences that are replayable.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean it's clear they've put a ton of resources and a ton of work into this game for sure. But from your and my perspective, we both tend to focus at least first on competitive. And there are some things about the game that I think we should talk about that are relevant to that I think affected both of our play experiences.
Sure, sure.
Um,
So tough love on the core gameplay next, right? I think we can
that's
definitely
why
agree that
people
the
are here
presentation
to
is
hear.
good. But yeah, that's probably why you're listening or watching. So let's do it. Like you said at the very beginning, it does feel as though a not necessarily console first experience, but something that was made for both, in a way that okay, this one uh set of UI decisions must work for both, and therefore they're not going to leverage the advantages of either the controller layouts that are possible via RTS games or the power of keyboard and mouse fully.
Yeah, it felt to me like more of a compromise than Halo Wars 2 was, because Halo Wars 2 um they went with like the radial menus
Yeah.
and it was all you could get to all of it with hotkeys, but it was functionally it felt very much like playing something on a console. And Realms of Ruin to me, the HUD not only was confusing, as someone that's played my fair share of RTS, um, but was actively annoying sometimes. There was a lot of menus that would come up,
Yeah.
like the build menu, and you couldn't interact with anything else on the screen while the build menu was up. Um,
Oh, that was so annoying. Yeah, it just takes up the left side of your viewport, and that's it. That's the only thing you can interact with. You have to dismiss it to get back to the action.
yeah, that was very frustrating and was actually confusing at first. And even during when I was writing my article after the beta ended, I think I was talking to you and I was like, I got into the global upgrade menu a couple times and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And then you said, oh, wait, it's the F key or something that you could like swap between the build menu.
Oh yeah,
Once you,
because there's these two buttons in the bottom right, and they're not labeled, and they're not particularly representative of what they're gonna do. So in other strategy games, you usually have an icon that is straight up text overlaid, right? So it says like, I don't know, think of something like Homeworld, where you're typically gonna have your build menu and research menu. And guess what? You have a build and research button. So very obvious what it's gonna do.
But yeah, so I was like scrambling right at the end of the beta to like get screenshots of all the upgrade stuff. um, yeah, and I hardly, and obviously I hardly even used it until like right at the end of the beta because I got into it like once by accident. Um, so yeah, a lot of frustration around the HUD and the user interface. Even getting into a match, not a ranked match, but a custom match, was a little more clicking than you would think it would be, because instead of doing pop-ups, everything was like swap to a different screen, swap back, swap to a different screen, swap back. Like changing your faction, you go to the faction select screen, and then you go back to the um the multiplayer match, and
Oh
then
yeah.
like you're jumping back and forth
So
with
many
these
games would just do
full
a
screen
drop
cards.
down, and it's so easy to understand and, meanwhile keep the view of the other screens of, let's say there's a chat, which there wasn't at the time, so because you just queue into matchmaking, right? So there wasn't like a global chat or friend interface or anything like that.
And then going into the gameplay, I think we can both agree one of the most jarring things is that, kind of like in the tabletop game, um, once you engage in melee, you're kind of locked in melee. Um, so it's not like many other games where, like I think Dawn of War 2 and maybe even Dawn of War 3, where when you engage in melee, your ranged units lose access to their ranged weapon and revert to a melee weapon and move more slowly, so they can't really get out of melee. This actually locks them indelibly into combat unless one of the participants retreats, which was
Yeah, and retreat means run back
frustrating.
to your base. So, as in
Yes, I'm
classic Dawn
sorry.
of War mechanics. So, for those of you who didn't play, you literally had to go back to your base to get out of melee. And that's a non cancelable order as well. So, that means you don't micromanage. You watch the combat unfold, and before you start losing models, then you typically retreat.
Um, yeah, and I think there's some level of micro in trying to keep your ranged units out of melee.
Yeah,
Um, and but once you're in melee, pretty much your options are use unit abilities or retreat. It's less dynamic where you can't like back someone out, move them around, try to flank your opponent. Once you get units engaged in melee, they just kind of stick there in one big clump. Um,
exactly. And oftentimes it's not even a player decision to do so because units have a very aggressive leashing behavior. So they like to enter melee combat. When the
um,
opportunity is there, they'll take it.
Now, as far as fixes for that, they did have several abilities that did knockbacks, and I think knockback abilities can disengage units from melee. So an increase in the number of those, I think, would help kind of smooth out the rough edges of that system. Or fingers crossed, they revert to something more like, and I think Dawn of War 2 did this, where it applies a speed penalty to units in melee as opposed to doing that indelible lock. I don't know if they've announced any plans on that either way, but I do have an article up that they wrote responding to some of the things we are talking about now. So we're talking right now about our beta experience, and then after this this segment, we will discuss briefly their article that they wrote addressing player feedback that we can maybe even put in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure we will. So, yeah, the controls weren't the best, and being locked into melee combat is neither strategic nor tactical.
The
I really, really hope they revert this. Honestly, my strongest recommendation, if I can make one, would be that. I'd be more interested in playing in the future if they had that. Otherwise, I'm gonna see this as a single player game. To be completely honest with you, the multiplayer gamer in me did not feel engaged.
um yeah, I enjoyed a lot of the core gameplay experience, but the locking into melee was frustrating.
Yeah,
I felt because I felt like it was taking choices away from me once combat started. Um, there was Ancestor's Legacy by I never can never remember if it's creative destructions or destructive creations. I think it's creative destructions. Anyway, um, you know what? I'm making a fool of myself, I'm sure. But anyway, Ancestors Legacy, they had a similar system where units get locked into combat, but they had a two-stage retreat. If you press retreat, the units will run out of combat about a screen's length away toward your home base from where the combat is. And if you press retreat again while they're running, they run all the way back to your base. And what that lets you do is tactically disengage and then re-engage, because a lot of units in Ancestors Legacy had abilities that automatically triggered when they engaged into melee. And there were also bonuses for like flanking or being really outnumbering a specific enemy. So you create this big ball and then you run people away and try to tactically get them back in so they could do their big engage abilities, or they could pick who they're flanking. And
You
Realms of
know,
Ruin doesn't really have that at this point.
I do wonder if this is a purposeful decision though, or whether there's some kind of technical limitation, because everything basically has matched animations, right? The animation work is absolutely fantastic in Realms of Ruin, which is why I said so many times that watching the combat is actually super cinematic and cool,
Mm-hmm.
as they're very reactive to each other, the units. So you get a certain hammer strike and it knocks back the unit as if it was hit by that hammer at the exact location that it happens. So that stuff is fantastic. And I wonder if the retreat mechanic has to do with that they have to create a retreat state for the animations and the transition for
No,
it.
that's an excellent point that honestly I hadn't even considered, that it could be that they're doing that as a compromise to get the better cinematic quality. My initial thought was that if they're specifically trying to target Warhammer players as opposed to RTS players, it could be like a pacing control thing where these people necessarily don't want to micro. But I think that what you're saying makes probably more sense than what I was thinking. But yeah, I don't know what they have planned for that, but the competitive player in me wants to not have that control taken away, because I feel like it's really decreasing the number of choices you can make once you enter combat.
Yeah, for sure. As for other choices in the game, the beta had a huge issue with the defensive structures. Just dictating the game, you would take an enemy base, erect your tower of power, and goodbye.
So
Nothing touches that.
as a way to expand on what you're saying for people that didn't play, so basically how the gameplay works is, on the map there are these territories, and each territory has like a flag in the middle of it. And it's actually one of my favorite systems in the game, and I actually kind of hope other games do this. Is capturing a territory is a relatively quick action, but once the territory is captured, it kind of fills in with your team color if you have a unit in
Oh
the
yeah.
territory uncontested. And the more filled in the territory is, the more resources you generate. So you can harass the opponent just by moving units into their territory, which shrinks the size of their zone, which decreases their income. So I think that's actually a really neat system.
Yeah, you
But
could just
what
walk them at the edge, and it's like harassment gameplay introduced into this relic capture point system, right? Which is
yeah,
actually a very nice innovation on the subgenre. I really like that part. That's actually probably the best part about Realms of Ruin, if I'm
I
honest.
I honestly agree. I think it's a great system, and I like I said, I hope more games do stuff like this.
Hmm.
And what I started doing is, I would just, with my first unit, I would try to just capture the territory and then run to the next one, and then I'd backfill with my next unit. Coming from your base structure on the way out, I would just stop in part way to help capture more territory, so I could grab more regions all at once. And the reason I wanted to grab more regions all at once is what you were saying. So for the people at home listening in, once you capture a territory, you can turn the flag into a different building. They're called bastions, and there's like 5 or 6 choices, I think.
Hmm.
In the beginning, you can only choose like 1 or 2 of them. Um, and it was like a scout tower, a resource generator, a defensive turret, and maybe a couple of others.
It's
And you
fun
could
for
upgrade.
regen, I believe.
Yeah, there's a healing one. that also reinforces your squads.
Hmm.
I think, but these structures were so powerful once you built them, and they were also relatively cheap, that it kind of shut the game down. So what people started doing in multiplayer, and what I did multiple times, is you would just go grab a couple of territories in the middle and reinforce them, and then you've basically at that point you've just won because um, you've given yourself a hard point that it's going to take them a really, really, really long time to break through.
Yeah.
And you're gaining resources while you're doing it, and they're losing resources because they're losing units and they have to run away.
Of course, the higher tier units can break it, but it's not like you're losing resources. So you have the territory, you have the resources, so you can match that, which
Yeah,
means
it
they
becomes
can commit even
very
more.
very, very hard to break. And the other thing, now that you mention this, so in a lot of relic games, your resource income is offset by your army size. So in Company of Heroes, I think at least 2 and 3, how it works is you have manpower, which is your primary resource for purchasing units. And the more squads you have, the more units you have on the field, the lower your manpower income is. And this creates kind of an equilibrium in the game that it's hard to get too far ahead in terms of army size, because as you're producing units, your ability to produce units is decreased. That is not the case right now in Realms of Ruin, as far as I know. It's just, being ahead in territory, being ahead in army size, it just compounds.
I believe
Um,
there was something scaling about the resources, but I'd be lying if I said I remember what it was.
well,
So I'll stop
I
talking.
certainly, I certainly hope that I'm wrong, but what I recall being discussed among people who were playing at the time was that system didn't exist. So I hope that I'm either wrong or um, or that they change it, because that was frustrating, because it feels like this sort of game you kind of want to really go back and forth kind of until the end. Um, that's one thing I liked about Dawn of War 2, is that you could lose in the mid game anyway. You could lose an army and then be able to produce a new one on top of it and come back, get back into the fight.
Yeah, certainly a very nice rubber banding mechanic that I didn't feel was present, if at all. It's not sufficient if it is present at all.
um,
I've won every game I played, and I live streamed, and I invited people to snipe me. So that was a very disappointing part to me. It's my first time playing, right? So there I go, figuring out what each button does, and the matchmaker, after hours of playing, still won't give me someone that can beat me. Come on.
I don't know that it actually used matchmaking, to be honest. I think it was just randomly matching people against each
It's
other.
entirely possible, but if it didn't, that's a tiny bit of a red flag, because will they truly develop that in the next few months? Maybe not. Maybe not,
I'm
but there will be ranked modes.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll have some sort of LO system or matchmaking rating.
I really hope for it.
But I think in the beta, I mean, was one match. It was two factions. Kudos to them for doing both factions, though.
Yeah,
Um, like it's good that they had both factions to that point where they could do that.
that's right. Do you want to talk
Um,
about those? The two factions?
yeah. So like you said, you corrected me earlier. It's the Auric Cruel Boys and the Stormcast Eternals. I actually preferred the Oryx. A lot of people were starting out playing the Stormcast Eternals, and I hate mirror matches, so I went right to the Oryx. um, so my recollection of how they worked is, in their tier 1 was very spammy. You had big squads of a lot of guys, and then at tier 2, you got some utility stuff and some spellcasters, and then at tier 3, I don't remember their tier 3 as well. I think they had a larger squad at tier 3 as well as some of their heavy hitters. But my big recollection with the Cruel Boys is their powerful support casters at tier 2 and tier 3.
Yes, me too. Me too. That's just um, Psystorm on steroids is basically what they have. And let me tell you, if you hit a clump of enemies with that, let's say during a fight at capture point, it's a Yeetus Deletus. Very powerful. So people will have to learn to micro against that kind of stuff. And, combined with the melee lock, that's actually rather dangerous. You have to retreat all the way to your base. So powerful AoEs in a game design like what we have in Realms of Ruin is actually really terrifying. Might really control the meta.
Um, yeah, I don't know that we have any good responses from them regarding how combat's going to be balanced. Um, but I think that was what I also saw, is that going as you went to tier 2 and tier 3, the Auric Cruel Boy's damage started kind of outscaling the survivability of the Stormcast Eternals. Um, so that was kind of the idea, is that it was kind of the Cruel Boys were numbers and damage, where the Stormcast Eternals were the big Space Marine style big blocks of hit points, with like paladin type abilities plus their lightning AoEs. But my recollection from what I saw during beta that was being discussed was that the Cruel Boys, as of right then, were outscaling the Stormcast Eternals in the late game.
Yeah, to beat that, you would require either the tier 3 options or stun combos from the Stormcast Eternal, which was actually a really nice way to deal with it, but it's certainly not about survivability, it's about ability usage. So the Stormcast Eternal end up not being tanky boys, but a little bit more like Protoss, where, okay, they're survivable, they're few, but you must micro well.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that I'm recalling as I read through this open beta document is that the very easy AI was actually harder, I think, than the normal AI. So I remember a couple of times. I remember going against the AI a couple of times, and I got stomped, and I got stomped, and I got stomped, and I finally got good enough to beat the AI. And then I switched to a higher level AI, and it was like, oh, this is actually easier. And I didn't realize it because I practiced so much against the harder one. I was like, oh, I'm just getting better. But yeah, they actually mistuned their AI a little bit, and the very easy AI was too strong.
Yeah, these kind of things happen. That's not too much of a surprise, although surprising
No,
that
and
they don't have
I
some
don't
global
count
modifiers, right?
I don't count that against them at all. I just thought that was a hilarious anecdote. And again, I mean, kudos to them for having multiple AI levels in their beta to test out.
I'm pretty
Like,
sure they made fun of themselves as well, so it's cool.
um, but yeah, is there anything else specifically that we need to touch on?
Absolutely.
Um,
Abilities. The abilities have a special thing about them. You don't just cast them, they're not just on a cooldown. You pay resources. What do you think about that? Like macro
so
resources,
including for retreat.
including for retreat. That's right.
So retreat costs, you had two resources, and I do not remember what they were called, but there was yellow and blue, I recall. And I think yellow was your primary resource, and then blue was like the tech resource. Um, if I'm not misremembering on that one. Does that sound right to you as well?
I don't remember the colors. Doesn't matter. Let's just refer them as core and tech.
Right. So your core resource was used to upgrade your base to the next level. And I think the first time it was just cost the core resource, and the second time it cost both of them. That was one thing that struck me, is that it was very difficult to tech up while you were using abilities. So there was this kind of tension between like winning fights and teching up, that I found, which isn't necessarily a bad thing to me, but it definitely took some getting used to. And because pretty much your options were like build units, use abilities, tech up, it felt like there was those fewer choices became more critical to get right. So there were times when it was like, do I want to use this ability? If I cast this spell with my hero, then I have to wait another 30, 40 seconds to tech up. Um, which, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if off the top of my head if I disliked that. It certainly was jarring the first time I experienced it.
It's very different, and it takes some adjustment in your head, I think, to just accept this and to macro around it. Obviously, the base building on the capture points where you could upgrade them to generate resources, that helps with the process. But that's also an investment in itself. So that's the choices you have. Like you said, make units, upgrade your tech tier, upgrade your
Oh,
capture points,
okay.
or use
I wrote
abilities.
this. I wrote this in my article. The resources are command is the primary resource. That's the blue one, and realm stone is the red one, red and yellow. It's the tech resource. So that was what it was. It was blue is command, and then red is realm stone. And most abilities cost, I think, realm stone. And that's how that works is it's passively generated by the territories as you capture them, and then you can build realm stone generators on top of the capture points um, that give you more basically. So kind of as the game goes on, it's kind of like Company of Heroes where realm stone approximates munitions, where in Company of Heroes most abilities cost munitions. um, I had to look it up because we are going back a couple months to the beta.
Yeah, you're
Um,
all good. You're all good. But I think that might be actually enough. I guess one more mention is that the techs are strange. They're some of them are mutually exclusive with each other, for example, which is not something that many games do attempt. But yeah, Realms of Ruin does that, and units
um,
have several upgrades in general.
yeah, so their tech tree is split into three tiers, and they're unlocked by the tier of your core base structure. It's kind of like Dawn of War 2, where you have your core base that trains units, and you can upgrade it 2 times.
Yep.
Um, and then after you upgrade it, it unlocks the next tier of resources, or not resources, technologies. Um, I do like the replayability of, I have these 5 techs and I can only choose 3 of them. Um, but it was, hopefully they have some sort of encyclopedia or something, because in the middle of the game while you're trying to like read the different texts, I found it a little tough to do that kind of on the
Yeah.
go.
Also, they're not showing the stuff that you haven't yet unlocked, I believe.
So right now I'm looking at my article, and in this one I am looking at a tier 2 tooltip. Well, I only have tier 1 unlocked, so I think you actually can
Okay.
look at them.
Maybe I misremembered that. Sorry.
But no, I think there might have been something like that. I know, for example, unit abilities, they didn't have a tooltip unless you selected the ability. So it was kind of a
Mm-hmm.
two-stage thing. You'd press to go into the mode to use the ability, and then you press again to activate it. But you couldn't see what the ability did unless you started that process.
Which is actually a good segue because that's one thing they're changing.
Yes. So, and thank goodness, because that was very frustrating as coming in and trying to learn the game. You don't want to try instinctually, you don't want to try to use the ability unless you know what it does.
Yes.
So there was this, like, every time you went to use an ability, there was this mental stop of like, what is this? Do I want to use it? Oh, wait, I have to press it to see what it does. It was very like jarring to try to go in and do that. Um, but yes,
So
that's one of the things that they're changing. So I'm sorry, go ahead. I've
no.
just
I was just gonna encourage you to talk about the things they're changing. You're the one with the article up, so.
right. So shortly after the beta concluded, the Realms of Ruin team released a big article with a list of all the things that they got from feedback and what they're committing to changing. And some of those things that we mentioned are things that they specifically address in the feedback. So for instance, we talked earlier about how when you bring up like the build menu, you can't interact with anything else in the game until it's closed. Also, you had to manually close it by pressing the I think it was the C key or whatever it was to open it again. And they're changing that, thank goodness, to if you click somewhere else, it'll just close the menu. Also, for PC oriented players, they're adding better tooltips to the tech tree and unit abilities.
Which is a very key improvement
Yeah,
to
really,
understanding the
really
game
important.
and to not get locked in the UI and whatnot. So both of
Um,
them massively appreciated by me for sure.
the other thing is, I'm sure you remember the mini map in the beta was not interactable at all. You
Yes.
couldn't click on the mini map to send a unit somewhere, to pan the camera to that point, anything. It was just kind of there to to show you what you were looking at and where your units were and that sort of thing. They have announced, they have committed to making the mini map interactable, bringing it in line with other RTS games, which is also kind of a big weight off of our shoulders.
Sigmar
Um,
bless.
Sigmar Plus. That's amazing. They are going to be adding a codex, an encyclopedia, which I think is really cool. That to me is kind of a gravy thing. It's frosting. It's not essential, but it's nice to have. And I'd like to see that they're doing that, especially for something like Warhammer, where there's so much lore behind everything.
Hmm.
Being able to put that in there and see what all the units do outside of combat, I think is really a really nice
Exactly.
touch.
So if I don't need to go to some fan website or wiki, and I can just load up the game and learn the units and what they are all about, not just gameplay wise, but also lore wise. Um, I'm sure they'll provide some snippets. Then, that's just going to speed up my process. It's fantastic.
So this is another thing that was also odd is many units could only retreat back to base if they were in combat. So you'd have these really damaged units that you'd want to get back to your base and you couldn't retreat them because they weren't fighting. So they're also committing to changing that so you can retreat at any point. And I don't know if there were keybinds, but they are noting that they will provide additional options for that. Which I know from our beta, a big thing that Tempest Rising was hit for during the preview was the state of our keybinds. And between the preview and our demo, we like our lead programmer went in and he was like, "Fine, I'm just gonna do it." And he completely revamped our keybind system. But that's something people always want to do. It's
Sure.
not a lot of people do it, but for the people that do, it's very, very important to them.
Yeah, RTS
Um,
players love their hotkeys, so as many hotkeys as possible, please.
um, so anyway, the Realms of Ruin team also, and this was something that I think we all noticed as well when playing the beta, is that sometimes there was a noticeable delay between like selecting the unit and telling it to do something, and then it sat there for a second, and then it turned and went to go do whatever you asked it to. So I know some people, there is some controversy in the RTS space over what responsiveness means. Again, to use the example of the game that I'm working on, in Tempest Rising, when you issue a move order to infantry units, they immediately start responding. But units in Tempest Rising have a bit of an acceleration, so it might take them a second to turn around. It might take them a second to speed up. That is not what we're talking about. In Realms of Ruin during the beta, there was a noticeable delay between clicking on the ground and the unit even starting to respond to the order. It wasn't extreme, but it was definitely noticeable. I would say something on the order of what do you think? Half a second to a second, somewhere in there.
Almost.
Um,
That's actually a very high number. So, and anybody that plays that game a lot and then swaps to another game will instantly realize how bad it is.
um, yeah, and that anyway, that's something that they know is an issue, and it's something they're committing to improving. So fingers crossed that um, that they can get that, because that is something that is definitely going to impact people's experience.
Yes. Now, I totally get the decision to, go for the acceleration based unit response system, but input lag is really not something that's easy to forgive in the RTS space. So people will hold them to significant standards there. Guaranteed.
Another big thing, well, especially with how good the game looks,
Yeah.
that kind of promises a level of quality and responsiveness that people are gonna um, are gonna, I think, rightly hold them to. The other thing that is noted in this article is, and this is something that I noticed as well, the way the economy scales in the beta was strange. In the very early game, you had very few resources, but then when you got to the mid to end game, so long as the map was relatively evenly divided, you kind of stopped having to worry about resource constraints. So it looks like one thing they're going to be addressing is kind of how the economy scales, and it sounds like what they might do, based on this article, is um, higher initial growth rates but lower scaling is what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
which
in
is
the
gonna
early
make
game you'll
the
have more resources, and in the later game you'll have less.
exactly. So in the early game, that should lead to a more forgiving pacing of the economy, where okay, you lose a bunch of units, but you also have income to afford new ones. So you should hopefully be able to keep in line with your opponent, even though population also happens to be tied to the tier up. So that could actually be a bit of a challenge, and I don't recall anything about that changing.
No, that's actually not true, at least for the Auric Cruel Boys. They have a note. Let me find. So they have this bullet point that says Auric Cruel Boys unit cap size needed to be higher. And their response was, we suspect this was due to it being unclear how to increase unit squad size in the population cap. We are addressing this for launch. So at least for the Auric Cruel Boys, it sounds like the different factions might have had different mechanisms for increasing
Oh,
their squad cap. I don't know. I assumed I recall it being the same. Um,
I recall it being the same too, with the Oryx having quite a bit more pop space.
um, But yeah, so
Huh.
what I recall is that both for the Stormcast Eternals and the Auric Cruel Boys, every time you increase the tech level of your main structure, it gave you more population cap.
Yeah, that's what I
Um,
recall. So I wonder what else there was. Maybe I also missed something, but the Orc already felt really strong as they were. So if
yeah,
I
and
missed it, then I don't know what it was, and I'm scared now.
likewise, I don't know if this was where something's being miscommunicated. Clearly, something's being miscommunicated, but I'm not entirely sure where.
Hmm.
Because again, my recollection from the beta is that both factions increased their squad cap the same way. Um, and I think, honestly, given my current mental map of the game, it makes sense that that would be the case. It would be really weird if one of the factions tied their squad cap to, I don't know, territory, and the other one was tech level. That would be, seem like that would be really hard to balance well. Um, but anyway, regardless, they are addressing um, the confusion over how you increase your squad cap. So I don't know if we don't know if they're going to try to change how it works, or if they're going to try to make it more forgiving, or if they're just going to update some tooltips to try to make it more clear. Um, but it looks like at this point they're planning on addressing that in some way.
Yes, and of course the best parts of the game actually coming out will mean that we'll have multiple maps, we'll have 4 races, and so many matchups in between the all the iterations there. So that's gonna be some fantastic variety for sure.
Yeah, launching with four factions is a really nice touch. We've had, in fact, we've most of what we've seen lately has been from Relic in that space, where they launched Age of Empires 4 with what, five, six, eight? I don't remember. It was a good number of factions though.
8, yeah.
Um, and then Company of Heroes 3, they had four. It was US Brits, and then two the Africa Corps, and then the other German faction. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, four is a nice touch.
Yeah, especially for launch. And I believe, has it been decided about Stormgate already? How many? Uh, did they say
My
4?
recollection for Stormgate is that they've announced two. I think they have talked about a third. I don't know if they specifically said we're going to have four factions. Um, my recollection is they have announced two, and they are holding on to a third.
Yeah, I also
But the
remember this.
but
But
I don't think they've said anything else about that at this point. When we talk about Stormgate again, I think it would be cool to talk about theories for a third faction because I think I have it pinned down.
oh,
Um,
sounds great, man. So we'll definitely do that. Stormgate is. We did promise a part 2, but I think we'll wait until there's more details about the Infernals. Like there was a little bit with the Frank Kaplaki video. They showed a little bit of the extra units that weren't shown at Gamescom.
yeah,
So
the Klepacki announce was really cool to me.
yeah,
I love his music, and the actual track they played sounds really good.
it does
Like,
slap. Very true. And yeah, there was a creature in there that splits into 2 when killed. So looking forward to stuff like that.
it actually doesn't split into two when killed. It is an ability that kills the unit and splits it into two, which is
An
actually more.
ability. Oh,
Yes, the player can choose when it does that. Um,
cool.
so you can choose to wait until it's almost dead, or you can do it right when you engage combat. So I think that's actually more interesting than just splitting when it's killed.
Yeah. Yeah, better than a reverse Archon. But anyway, for Realms of Ruin, I think the synopsis from both of us is that we are looking forward to it, and I'm pretty sure both of us will play it. I'll probably do another stream session of it, see if I like the multiplayer. If not, I'll just quietly play the campaign on my own time.
um, yeah, I'm feeling pretty bullish about it at this point. It shows really well. It's their article that they put out shows that they're actually considering issues that players had with the beta. I mean, that's no guarantee that all of them are going to be addressed in what people might consider a satisfactory way, but clearly they're listening. Clearly they care, which I think is a really nice. It's a really good sign.
Yeah, I'm also really hoping for a spectator mode and replay mode so that perhaps commentary can be considered. Although I've seen no guarantees of that happening.
Um, Off the top of my head, neither do I. But I also, if they have a replay system, I'm definitely going to do at least a couple of casts for it.
Nice.
I'm trying to get my YouTube channel back off the ground, and I'm kind of waiting for this next round of games to start coming out. I think to start doing that. So
yeah, awesome. So yeah, with that, I guess we're gonna wrap up. Well, Realms of Ruin is gonna be a little bit of Dawn of War 2. Certainly no base building, but if you loved Dawn of War 2, you're probably gonna like this. Definitely worth to take a look. And
yeah, absolutely.
any thoughts for the exit before I start shilling?
No, I think I've said everything that I have in my head about Realms of Ruin right now.
Sounds great. So we do have a Patreon where you can get early access to our podcast. We just upload essentially the video there early and of course ad free. You can consider that. If you want to join, you can also gain access to our private Discord with that. Otherwise, we're on all the major podcast platforms. That's Spotify, Amazon Music, and so on and so forth. All of the major ones, like I said. So with that, been Balint Martin, and we've had Brandon Castile with us today. It's been great, and we'll see you the next time.
See you next time.